Here's a pattern I see constantly. Growth stalls, and then a founder's first instinct is something like, we need to hire a stronger head of growth, or we need to make a better funnel, or we need to increase ad spend. But what they don't say out loud, and what they often can't even see, is that the real problem might be that they are strategically misaligned with their co-founder. That emotional debt has compounded because their contributions feel asymmetrical, that each feels unseen by a partnership model neither of them even made explicit in the first place. And so they'd rather avoid that difficult feedback conversation. And instead, they'll try to just keep working around one another. See, founders almost never connect their business problems to their co founder problems. And if I had to guess, it's because one part of them doesn't want to. I'm Dr. Matthew Jones, and I help co-founding teams fix exactly that before it costs them their company. Now, when I work with a new founding team, one of the first conversations we have is I help them fully scope the impact of their conflict. Because if we can start getting to those deeper layers of what's actually happening, not just between the two of them, but underneath it, uh, then they can start to create change. And so I have a whole framework for this that I call the Cofounder Conflict Impact Matrix. And in a minute, I'm going to show you exactly how it's built, including one quadrant in particular that catches almost everyone off guard. But first, here's the part that most founders get wrong about this entire conversation. And I've seen this across literally hundreds of discovery conversations with startup CEOs. When founders are truly honest about the wide-ranging impact of what co-founder conflict is actually costing them, what they discover is it shows up in almost every single domain, like personal, professional, relational, organizational. Like it's comprehensive. But most founders walk into an initial conversation with me only aware of like one or two impacts. And the rest they've been minimizing, sometimes to a degree that honestly borders on denial. And it's not because they're naive. It's more so that fully acknowledging the true scope of co-founder conflict is genuinely threatening to like the sense of control, to their identity and to the story that the company runs on logic and not two people's nervous systems. See, founders actually want the problem to be external because if you have an external problem, it's easier to fix. There's something you can do about it, right? You can either hire for it, fix it, replace it. But the co-founder relationship fundamentally doesn't work that way. And so you can do every single thing right from one person's perspective and still not fully control it. And sitting with that uncertainty and acknowledging it is far more uncomfortable than just chasing a metric. So I'll say this directly. Despite the profound importance of the co-founder relationship, which in my head is unquestionably the most important relationship in your entire business, there's hardly any real literature on it whatsoever. So as I was writing my book, The Co-Founder Effect, a few years ago, like I was doing some meaningful research, and there wasn't a single academic paper in a peer-reviewed psychological journal that investigated the co-founder relationship. Right. And so what that left me with was trying to piece together other related domains, such as founder mental health and all of Michael Freeman's great contributions there, such as, marital research and kind of what, the research on individuals in a marriage and the relationship as a whole, organizational psychology and that type of literature. And then I also layered in some existing data that we can get from like Noam Wasserman, who wrote The Founder's Dilemmas, who's a great source of information on co-founder dynamics. And then, Carta, who's collected some of this as well. And I put all of that together into the co-founder conflict impact matrix. And so if you pull up my book, The Co-Founder Effect here, it's on page 48, and you'll see this little diagram here, which is what we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about today. Now, the matrix maps the consequences of co-founder conflict across two axes in a surrounding circle, right? And so the horizontal axis here ends up distinguishing between the professional and relational consequences on the left, and then the personal and individual consequences on the right. So we're looking at, again, kind of the dyad or triad or whatever the case may be versus the individual side. And then the vertical axis is trying to show you the difference between the direct consequences, like those that you notice, as a person quite directly, versus the indirect or like secondary effects of co-founder conflict. And so there's four different matrix points that we're going to talk about today, and we're going to talk about the overall systemic circle as well. And so the thing that I want you to notice is that within this first domain of the direct professional and relational pieces. This is the quadrant that most of you already are living every single day and understand. These are the visible, immediate impacts of co-founder conflict on the partnership itself. And it tends to start with some uneven distribution of labor, right? Like one founder starts withdrawing from their responsibilities because they don't want to engage or interact with a more critical partner. And so then that other partner starts compensating by taking on more and more operational responsibility. What that leads to is resentment building on both sides. And then from there, the role clarity starts to break down, where all of a sudden we're stepping on each other's toes and decision-making authority feels a bit unclear. And then that often, not always, the CEO then might start micromanaging those product decisions, just as an example. The CTO then disengages, not feeling like their input really matters anymore. And again, in these kind of direct consequences, what you'll also notice are things like the Gottman Four Horsemen, which are contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness, and criticism. And those communication patterns are the most predictive contributors to failing marriages, and they show up just as destructively in founding partnerships too. And eventually, it adds up to this. Like the partnership that was once your competitive advantage starts to feel more like a liability. And then the question shifts from like, how do we build this together to, can we even continue working? Like, is this even sustainable? And that's what happens just between the two of you. But quadrant 2, is what it does to you alone. So again, this is looking more at those direct personal and individual consequences, because there is a meaningful personal cost, and it's one that most founders underestimate. Beneath the anger and hostility that you might feel is always something more vulnerable. Hurt, fear, disappointment, like even a feeling of powerlessness. Like you start snapping over your co-founder over a minor mistake, but what you're actually reacting to is months of feeling unheard. And alongside it, you might be feeling some real grief and anxiety because you're, in a sense, mourning the relationship and the partnership that you thought you were building, but are clearly not. And so then there's kind of a coping method that starts showing up here as well, which is triangulation. So now, as you experience this frustration and some of those deeper feelings that I just articulated, you want to get away from them. And so you start displacing, you start sharing these thoughts and feelings onto another person, like your spouse. And other times it can be an investor, a mentor, some of your employees. And while this can create some temporary relief, it also keeps the problem stuck. It keeps it frozen in place in the dyad. And so this is how what starts as just kind of a relational challenge starts to become an organizational issue. The problem is within this individual component, one of the more challenging research findings that Michael Friedman and others cite is the degree of loneliness in the entrepreneurial journey. This is something you're intimately familiar about. Most people don't understand what it's like to be a founder. They don't understand what it's like to push themselves and to have that drive and determination, because it's just by societal definition abnormal. It's outside that normal range of ambition and risk tolerance, et cetera. But that loneliness can make mental health issues worse. And so part of what can be so painful about co-founder conflict on this more individual side is that you start to feel more isolated. You can be sitting 3 feet away from your co-founder and also feel like they're millions of miles away, right? That's the personal cost. But then, in addition to that, there's like this third layer that most founders never even see coming because it doesn't happen directly, right? It happens to the relationship itself, kind of silently in the background while you're not even looking. And so that is this, professional, relational, indirect consequences, quadrant 3 in the book. And this is where a lot of the insidious damage starts to happen because it's like the slow secondary erosion that starts to be more difficult to trace back to the co-founders. But nonetheless, it happens like this. Trust erodes in like these small little moments, like a passive aggressive comment or a decision made without your input. And each of those little paper cuts add up and it creates these kind of cracks in the relational foundation. And, then internally, your nervous system starts treating your co-founder as a threat. You'll notice this as you open like a Slack message, for example, first thing in the morning. If you notice that tightness in your chest or like you holding your breath or that like feeling of dread as you know that you've received several emails from your co-founder, that's exactly what I'm talking about here. And eventually those negative attitudes toward your co-founder solidify, right? And so then you start rehearsing counter arguments before they've even spoken. You're telling yourselves negative stories about their intent. And so what began as these little small moments of misattunement start to calcify into a permanent lens that creates confirmation bias. And that ends up shaping every single interaction with your co-founder, whether you're aware of it or not. And so then that's why once we get to quadrant four, and you can tell these are starting to like build on one another. That's where quadrant four really surprises everyone I work with, because it's not really about the partnership anymore. Like at this point, as we're talking about these personal, individual, and indirect consequences, we're really talking about what being in this state for months at a time does to you, even if things look fine to the outside observer. This quadrant is the one that surprises most co-founders because it's something that just accumulates over time. Like things like exhaustion, burnout, those things that you can't just push through start to compound. And so then even small decisions feel burdensome. If we're to like break out a RACI, it's all over the place and it's feeling kind of confusing. And you and your co-founder might have different definitions of what it means to be consulted at this point, right? And so then like these important strategic decisions get delayed. And so the business starts feeling that as well. And then there's these unhealthy coping strategies on the individual side that really start to increase. Like you might find yourself disassociating, like just emotionally disconnecting because you're so overwhelmed. You might, use alcohol and drugs more than usual. You might be scrolling, just kind of mind numbing yourself to feel a bit of comfort in this uncomfortable situation. And then there's displacement, right? Like this emotional accumulation leads to then worse quality relationships because you're now all of a sudden angry at your spouse or you're angry at your dog, even though you know it's not either their fault. Because part of what happens, and this is well documented in marital research, is there's a spillover effect. So the stress of your co-founder relationship spills over and impacts your personal relationships. And so then you can't be fully present and engaged with your family. And then you're short, you're frustrated. I've been there. And then all of a sudden, there's a crossover effect where those personal challenges then show up in the workplace and make your relationship experience with your co-founder even worse. So it creates this negative spiral that you can't get out of. And then finally it accumulates in this like silent emotional withdrawal, right? You start giving short answers, you stop initiating, you just pull back and start coasting. And the problem though is you're excluding yourself from having the difficult interactions that the partnership needs to evolve and grow. And that makes repair less and less possible. Which brings me finally to this circle around the matrix, which is the systemic and cultural dimensions. This is bad enough just individually and kind of relationally with your co-founder in the ways I just articulated. But what makes co-founder conflict an existential risk and not just a personal risk is that it doesn't stay contained between the two of you. When co-founders are gridlocked, that unconscious tension permeates every single meeting, every single interaction. The vibe is off. People feel that. They're walking on eggshells. There's tension, and your employees see it. And so direct feedback starts to disappear. Usually like the problem founder, as an example, starts getting isolated further. They get put into like these side roles or whatever, their responsibilities get taken away. And then people stop giving that founder direct feedback. They start just back channeling. And what happens is the system is absorbing this relational tension, which increases churn and it decreases faith in leadership. So this is where it gets really dangerous because again, none of this stays in its own lane. It all creates like this negative feedback loop. And that's really what this matrix is designed to show you, that co-founder conflict really creates a self-reinforcing cycle with no clear starting point or end point. Like workplace tension spills into your personal life, and that personal stress amplifies the emotional distress at work. And then those heightened emotions produce less productive conversations. Less productive conversations erode trust and alignment. They make those roles and responsibilities even more murky. And then that degraded partnership, impacts how you treat employees and how employees treat you. And it starts accelerating the very cultural deterioration that makes the entire problem worse, because now not only are you misaligned with your co-founder, but you're going to notice all the kids are freaking out because mom and dad are upset. And so there's going to be a lot more personnel issues for you to deal with. That's exactly why co-founder conflict is an existential risk for the entire company. And that's why it's worth addressing early, right? Before it's completed several cycles here, because it's so much more effective to do this work early than it is to allow all of these different forces across these quadrants to accumulate. And so the co-founder conflict impact matrix, it's not a verdict, it's a mirror. And if you can recognize your partnership in some of these quadrants, that recognition itself is super valuable because it means that you're finally willing to look at what you've probably been minimizing for a while. Now, my book here, The Co-Founder Effect, does walk through the matrix in even more detail, and then it shares the exact frameworks you need to address each of them more effectively on your own. So your co-founder relationship is way too important to leave to chance. Subscribe and grab The Co-Founder Effect below, and I'll show you exactly what to do with it.